The following content has been provided by members of the Greater Hamilton community.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Remembering Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. and Lincoln Alexander, brought to you by Afro-Canadian Caribbean Association. My name is Dwayne Morgan, and I will be your host today. For those who don't know me, I am a two-time Canadian National Poetry Slam champion, writer, speaker, entertainer, producer, and lover of celebrating our community and our trailblazers and achievements. We are extremely lucky to be in this great country that we call Canada, and we would like to pause and acknowledge the land where we reside. The city of Hamilton is situated upon the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. This land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which was an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabeg to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We further acknowledge that this land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase of 1792 between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We should also acknowledge that Canada and the Hamilton-Niagara region is a place of great significance to many Black communities whose histories and presence have been forgotten and largely erased. I acknowledge Africa as the mother of all creation and human life. Even though Africa has suffered untold and unacknowledged miseries, she continues to ascend. Africa and her people still demand reparations for such atrocities as the slave trade, slavery, colonialism, and continued global anti-Black racism. We will now ask Quisha Wint to perform Lift Every Voice, the Black National Anthem, and O Canada.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into forever in the path we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places of God where we met thee. Lest our hearts drunk with the wine of the world we forget thee. Shadowed beneath thy hand, may we forever stand true to our God, true to our native land. land kept on brasser pour les pays, il s'est porté la gloire. Ton histoire et toute épopée des plus brillants exploits. God keep our land, oh, glorious and free.
Thank you so much for those renditions, Quisha. So it is my absolute pleasure to be hosting today's event. And I take personal inspiration in the life, legacy, and example of both Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the Honorable Lincoln Alexander. So we have another great event for you today. We are in for an uplifting and enjoyable conversation this afternoon, where you can sit back and relish in some amazing entertainment and also hear from the founding dean of the Lincoln Alexander Law School, Donna Young. Another amazing performance coming up from Quisha Wint. You'll hear from the granddaughter of Lincoln Alexander, Erika Alexander, and I will share a couple spoken word performances with you. But first, let's hear from the president of ACA, Miss Evelyn Myrie.
So the Afro-Canadian Caribbean Association take this opportunity to welcome you to a special program recognizing Martin Luther King Jr. and the Honorable Lincoln Alexander for their immeasurable contributions to the character of our community, country, and global village. Today, we pay tribute to Canada's first Black Member of Parliament, Cabinet Minister, and Lieutenant Governor of Ontario. The Honorable Lincoln Alexander would have celebrated 100 years of age this January 21st. A son of Caribbean immigrants, Lincoln Alexander was born in Toronto in 1922. He was voted Hamilton's favorite son. He was well loved by all. He was a trailblazer who championed racial equality and justice. His commitment to human rights was instrumental in breaking down barriers, changing attitudes, and helping shape the diverse and inclusive Canada we know today, writes Minister Bardish Chagger in 2021. Martin Luther King is known around the world as one of the leading figures in the civil rights movement in the United States, and indeed his work has impact not only in the United States, but here in Canada and indeed around the world. As we reflect on the rich legacy of both men today, let us consider how to rededicate our energies to standing in solidarity with those who have been traditionally marginalized, Indigenous people, people of color, cultures and nationalities, people of all sexual orientation. Let us stand together to drive change, not only locally, but globally. We look forward to a wonderful program this afternoon. On behalf of all of us at the Board of Directors at the ACCA, we want to welcome you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Myrie. And now we have greetings from the Mayor of Hamilton, Fred Eisenberger.
Thank you for inviting me to join this virtual event today. Celebrating past and present and evolving Black experiences and achievements in our city is helping build a strong community rooted in ethnic, cultural, and racial diversity. Thank you to the ACCA in working to make this important remembrance possible. Your ongoing support is greatly appreciated. Your contributions to the community, from Black history education to fundraising for social justice activities engaging young people, and the John C. Holland Awards to providing support to the community in the midst of the pandemic, has made a difference. So let us continue to work together to make Hamilton a better place to live, work, and raise a family. Thank you so much for your ongoing efforts. I look forward to the list of speakers lined up for today.
Thank you, Mayor Eisenberger, for those remarks. In a few minutes, we will hear from our keynote speaker, who will speak to the legacy of both Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the Honorable Lincoln Alexander. But before we do, I would like to share a spoken word poem with you that just looks at the entire concept of legacy. January 1974. Two immigrants huddled, shielding themselves from the Canadian cold, rubbing their bodies together like sticks in the hands of Boy Scouts, trying to recreate the Jamaican heat they had known well but had left behind. Paradise was now just a memory tucked into that space behind the eyes, replaced by a reality of snow as they skated on thin ice as they tried to find this new life they had been promised and heard so much about. Nights of heat-seeking planted a bun in the oven. By the third trimester, an engagement ring came as they counted down to month number 9. Each October morning was greeted with a case of nerves as they anticipated whether or not this would be the day. 2 weeks came and passed. On a Monday, they congregated with potential grandparents to eat, talk, laugh, and give thanks to the Savior. Later that night, what might have been gas turned out to be labor. Relatively painless, 2 hours later, the two who had given up their son were given a new one, their first. Born on a Tuesday, I was the immigrant's dream. My mom was a hot girl in the 70s, but having me made her lukewarm as she stretched from a size 7 to a 14 to accommodate my potential. So I always try to live up to it, humbled by the sacrifices made by 21-year-old kids. I am the immigrant's dream, cut from the same cloth, just another part of the quilt. So everything that I build is built on their backs. I take no steps forward without looking back. I keep my past in my present and my lineage in perspective so that regrets will never be a part of our family's existence. No second guessing whether or not a better life ever existed. For as long as I continue bearing my soul through my creativity and my writing, there'll be no need for them to yearn for the heat from the Jamaican sun, because I am their dream. And when they look at me, I want them to see that their sun is still shining. Thank you. Now, earlier, I mentioned that you will hear from Miss Donna Young. So let me tell you a little bit about her before she comes on stage. Donna Young is the founding dean of the Lincoln Alexander School of Law. Before assuming her deanship, she was the president of William McKinley Distinguished Professor of Law and Public Policy at the Albany Law School and a joint faculty member at the University of Albany's Department of Women's, Gender, and Sexuality Studies. Her teaching and scholarship focus on law and inequality, race and gender discrimination, and academic freedom and university governance. Since joining the Lincoln Alexander Law School, Dean Young's contributions to the legal profession in Canada have been recognized in several ways. In the last year, she was the recipient of the 2021 Canadian Law Awards Female Trailblazer Award. She was the recipient of the 2021 Top 25 Women of Influence Award, and she was recognized as one of Toronto Life's 2020 Most Influential Torontonians. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me to welcome Miss Donna Young.
Thank you so much, Dwayne. Your words are inspiring. Your poetry is lovely. I love the images of strong Black families. So thank you for that. And thank you all for inviting me to spend some time with all of you on this decidedly non-tropical January day in Canada. I very much appreciate your invitation to share some of my thoughts about Martin Luther King and Lincoln Alexander during the very important week when we come together to celebrate their birthdays of these great men. And it's an honor to be joining member of Mr. Alexander's family on this occasion. Tomorrow, Martin Luther King would have turned 93, just a little younger than my father. And on Friday, we celebrate the 100th anniversary of Lincoln Alexander. And why are these two particular birthdays so important? Well, for those who might be still in denial that anti-Black racism continues in Canada, The Zoom bombing that happened at the beginning of the program reminds us why we're here and how much work still needs to be done. But these two figures are, these two celebrations are public celebrations that are devoted to the memories of these two Black men from very humble beginnings, but with immense potential, who helped shape and deepen our understanding of what is required to live a fully dignified life, free from violence and discrimination, and free from the systemic barriers born out of slavery and colonization that were erected for the sole purpose of keeping us down. As a Black woman with familial roots in the Caribbean and with professional roots in the legal community in the United States and Canada, these two men are important to me personally, but also as guideposts for my professional ambitions. My personal kinship with them comes not only from a sense of common identity and interest, but also from a professional understanding of their important roles in transforming two distinct but similar legal systems that I have been studying for more than 30 years, first in Canada as I launched my legal career, then in the United States where I became a professor of law, and now back in Canada as I helped to build the newest and really exceptional law school in Canada, the Erika Alexander School of Law in Toronto. Throughout my 30 years in practice of law and in the legal academy, the state of the law and the legal systems has brought me close to despair. But witnessing the determination of those whose dedication to righting past wrongs and whose commitment to fighting against unfairness and injustice has brought me hope and inspiration. If you'll indulge me for just a bit, I'd like to speak for just a few minutes to tell you about my background, which provides some context for my remarks today about these two legal giants. I would imagine that my upbringing is kind of familiar to many of you. My three siblings and I were raised in a warm and welcoming West Indian household in North York, just outside of Toronto at the time, by our Jamaican mother and our Belizean father, a retired nurse and a high school teacher. My parents still live in the house where I grew up and where they still receive visitors who usually don't leave without offers of food and drink to send them on their way. And in fact, my best friend, who was my next door neighbor as I grew up since the age of 3, and whose family are Jewish Canadians originally from Eastern Europe, she visited my parents over the holidays and was sent home, and I had a picture of this, she was sent home with a bottle of rum punch, a load of hardo bread, and some Jamaican Christmas cake. This is all to say that we Caribbeans like to share the gifts that come from our kitchens. But in any case, after more than 2 decades of teaching law in the United States, with a commitment to the teachings of critical race theory and feminism, I moved back to Canada to assume the deanship of the Faculty of Law at Ryerson University in January of 2020, just 2.5 months before the pandemic. The first employee at the law school, and this is important for this audience in particular, the first employee at the law school and the only other full-time employee at the time that I arrived was an incredibly accomplished, inspiring woman who was responsible for setting up the operational framework to do what we needed to do before we welcomed our new class. Together, the two of us hired a young man who assisted us, and then another accomplished woman who helped us to set up the academic administrative structure of our new law school. So for the first few months, at the very beginning of the law school's existence, there were only 4 full-time employees at the law school, working day and night to build it from the ground up, and all 4 of us were Jamaican. Let that sink in a bit, because I can guarantee that there is not another law school in Canada and probably the United States that can brag that those responsible for putting into operation their law schools were Black people from the West Indies, and 3 women at that. And in the last 2 years since then, I'm extremely proud to say that the Erika Alexander School of Law has grown exponentially and has now included staff, students, and faculty from all corners of the world, including several more staff and students from the West Indies, including my assistant who hails from Trinidad. So think about this for a moment. Canada's newest law school was at the beginning completely staffed by members of the Caribbean community. So now what does Martin Luther King and Lincoln Alexander have to do with all of this? Well, Lincoln Alexander's influence is obvious to many of us. In the less than a year in operation, Ryerson's Faculty of Law was renamed to the Lincoln Alexander School of Law in recognition of Mr. Alexander's contributions to the justice system and to all Canadians. The only law school in Canada whose humble beginnings and whose very identity was inspired by a great Black Canadian with Caribbean roots, a man who was a partner in Hamilton of the first interracial law firm in the country, a man who became Canada's first Black member of Parliament in 1968, who became Canada's first Black member of the federal cabinet, who was the first Black chair of the Workers' Compensation Board, who became the first Black person in Canada to serve as a provincial lieutenant governor, and who was the only person to serve 5 times as chancellor of the University of Guelph. His list of accomplishments are impressive, but those accomplishments were accompanied by a genuine love for his fellow Canadians that was recognized by those who knew him, but also by those whose lives he touched in some way. When the law school announced our renaming, we received hundreds of messages, letters, tweets, and it was in those messages that people mentioned Lincoln Alexander, and their messages really struck me. Universally, they congratulated us for naming our law school after Mr. Alexander, but the majority did not mention his list of professional triumphs. Rather, they spoke about Mr. Alexander and what he meant to them. The time when he visited their schools or attended their graduation ceremonies, the time that they bumped into him in the street or a restaurant or a theater, or the time they worked for him or saw him speak. And in fact, my first and only interaction with Mr. Alexander was when he was the graduation speaker at my law school ceremony back in 1991. But the messages that we received mentioned his grace, his smile, his sense of style. People spoke about his eloquence and the care he took to remember their names and to ask to hear their stories. When he died, the media across the country gave some of the most moving tributes. And in the Hamilton Spectator, they wrote that it was his personal characteristics, perhaps even more than his professional accomplishments, that contributed to the image of the kind of person most of us would want our children to become. And as the Dean of the Lincoln Alexander School of Law, it's my hope that our students will take inspiration from him when deciding what kind of lawyer they want to become. But we're also here to honor the memory of Martin Luther King. I moved to the United States from Canada in 1992, shortly after I graduated from law school at Osgoode in Toronto, a move that was supposed to be temporary. When I moved, I very much identified as Canadian, and that has never changed. But as the years went by, and I ended up spending 26 years in the United States, I also came to identify very strongly as an African American woman. Living within the legal academy in the United States as a Black person, it's impossible to escape the reality of slavery's influence that permeates the pages of legislation and judicial opinions, that permeates the practices of police departments, the offices of district attorneys, the structure of law firms and corporations, places of employment, housing, education, health services, and more. The US Constitution itself played a fateful role in supporting and perpetuating slavery at the time that it was drafted and forevermore. Blacks in the United States have suffered the ravages of state-sanctioned hate and abuse. Martin Luther King knew all of this, and it was out of love for his fellow human beings that he joined in communion with Blacks around the country, and in fact, with all those around the world who suffered under systems of oppression. Martin Luther King was not just an inspirational speaker. He understood deeply this embeddedness of racism within the legal structures governing the United States. And he understood that the only way to move forward was to force a fundamental change in the laws and the legal system. He instilled in me and others a deep appreciation for the promise of the law, but the deep roots of racism and misogyny embedded within it, starting from the United States Constitution itself. In the shadow of the civil rights movement and with the legacy of powerhouses like Martin Luther King and others, becoming African American was inevitable for me. There is common cause with those whose identity are formally and systematically degraded. Finding common cause was unavoidable. My professional life thereafter was to teach my students the role that the legal system plays in upholding white supremacy, a message that was central to Martin Luther King's legacy, but also how the law can be used as just one tool to help dismantle oppressive systems. It is probably not lost on many of you that Martin Luther King and Lincoln Alexander were very different men with very different styles and politics. Martin Luther King fought the system from the left, outside of established institutions. Lincoln Alexander fought to break down barriers inside established institutions. I'm sure that had they met over a meal, their discussions would have involved polite disagreement as to the best way to move established norms. But both men drew inspiration from a strong commitment to justice, to fairness, and to equality. It's fitting that we gather today to celebrate the legacy of these two great men. Speaking at this Afro-Canadian Caribbean Association event has given me an opportunity to reflect on the importance of those who have come before us, but also to highlight the importance of family and community, specifically about the contributions of those whose roots are in the Caribbean. As a lawyer, educator, and a strong believer in social and racial justice, these two men are more than symbols to me. They set the groundwork for a world in which everyone is entitled to dignity and respect, and in which everyone is owed a government that upholds their rights and removes barriers to their advancement. My parents moved to Canada from Jamaica and Belize more than 65 years ago. They're children of the Caribbean, deeply rooted in traditions and culture, but grateful for the opportunities that Canada has given them and their families. During the summer of 2020, when the world was erupting in righteous indignation over the murder of George Floyd and others, I sent a message to my students. I spoke of my father's recent 92nd birthday and expressed to my students that even in the midst of racial strife and turmoil, there was reason to be optimistic. Dr. King famously said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." I inherited an optimism from my parents, who, like Martin Luther King and Lincoln Alexander, lived through some of the most turbulent and tragic periods in human history. And like Martin Luther King and Lincoln Alexander, they are optimists because they believe in the possibility of justice. On the walls of our law school, we have one of Mr. Alexander's most poignant quotes. He says, "It's not our duty to be average. It's not your duty to be average. It's your duty to set a higher example for those to follow." This is a message for all of us. Since the summer of 2020, when the world rose up in protest against the brutal murders of Black men and women in the United States, Canada, and other parts of the world, we have witnessed horrors. The hidden grave sites of innocent children on the grounds of residential schools in Canada. The really brutal hate crimes in Canada and elsewhere against Asian people and people of Asian descent. The anti-Semitism and Islamophobia that was exhibited all around the world. The missing and murdered women in Canada and the United States. The deep-seated systemic inequalities exposed during the pandemic around education, healthcare, employment, housing, and policing. And other crises that are so crushing that they make one wonder how it's possible to stay positive. How can anyone be optimistic in the face of such horror? We can only do what we can, but each of us is graced with personalities and convictions that motivate who we are and what we do. Let us use the memory of Lincoln Alexander and Martin Luther King to remind ourselves and others that we have an important role to play. We can be optimistic because with every instance of tragedy, there are hundreds, thousands, and millions of people working hard to contribute in meaningful ways to fighting against injustice, to making benefits accessible to all, and to ensuring that the law is more just, fair, and equitable. I thank you once again for allowing me to share my thoughts with you. And I wish you a beautiful week where we celebrate these two great men. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Young. Your insight on Dr. King Jr. and the Honorable Lincoln Alexander is remarkable. We are all better off after hearing your thoughts on these two historic gentlemen. I have another piece of poetry that I would like to share with you before we get into our next speaker. So if you will indulge me, it goes as follows. On your marks, get set. And so it begins. On the dark continent of enlightenment, the place from where all history comes, a people who were so ahead of their time, they were sending text messages when they only had drums. Out of the starting blocks, we are off to an early lead as world travelers and explorers, sharing our philosophies, creating universities and structures that would make the world stop and wonder before passing the baton on to the relay's next runner in the Caribbean Sea, who lost a bit of ground through the Middle Passage and slavery, but nobody said that the race would be easy. So for over 400 years, they continue to run, limping through the pain, knowing that cramps will come and it's going to hurt sometimes. But you've got to focus and keep going through the plantations, the lynchings, and the hate, even when the spectators in the stands call you other than your name, because it is not what we are called, but what you answer to that is important. Victory is an uphill climb, and we've got to continue to rise like Lazarus, knowing that even the slightest of steps can mean so much. Sister Rosa Parks sat down to stand up. So I can't give up as I try to make sense of this baton that's been placed in my hand while I struggle just to be accepted as a man in this world that seems more concerned with whether or not I'm endowed down south, and I'm all about being endowed in the places where it counts in my family and my community. Because knowledge of self is like a garden. If it is not cultivated, you cannot reap a harvest. Victory will come to those who choose to run the hardest. And it really doesn't matter if you know the secret, because not everyone will believe enough in themselves to do something with the information. No one was made to be a spectator in life. We are all the active participants in the race to fulfill our destiny. So when the baton comes, take it and run. Because failure isn't a crime, but aiming too low is. Because if you reach for the top of a tree, you might never get off the ground. But if you reach for the stars, you might at the very least get to the top of that tree. And I might not get to the finish line with you, but I will continue to strive to carve out my own space before passing this baton on to a new generation of runner, confident in victory because success, it runs in my race. Thank you very much. So now we are going to continue our afternoon. Our next speaker has a special relationship with one of the men we are remembering today. Erika Alexander graduated from McMaster University with a Bachelor of Arts degree in Political Science and Religious Studies. She is a former member of the Hamilton Police Service, where she worked for 10 years. Currently, she is pursuing holistic medicine and life coaching. Erika engages in public speaking, representing her family and grandfather, the Honorable Lincoln Alexander. She's also passionate about literature, cultural studies, activism, world history, and spirituality, and anything that involves the creative mind. We are honored to have the granddaughter of the Honorable Lincoln Alexander with us today to share. Please help me welcome Erika Alexander.
Thank you, Dwayne, for that wonderful introduction. I'm super excited to be able to partake in this event today, celebrating Martin Luther King and my grandfather, Lincoln M. Alexander, Lincoln Alexander Day is coming up on Friday. But not only that, we're celebrating my grandfather's 100th year celebration coming up. I would like to thank Donna Young and Dwayne Morgan and Evelyn, Myrie, and Aka for putting on this wonderful event. And I'm super excited to also know that the Honorable Jean Augustine is here with us. She's always been a great hero and supporter of myself and my family. The importance of recognizing this day has always been very important to my family as we continue to honor my grandfather's legacy. And I'm just always blessed to be able to partake and be able to share my story of what it was like to be with my grandfather, what it was like living, growing up with him and seeing his life unfold as it did. My grandfather always wanted to live to be 100 years old, so it's kind of special now that we're celebrating his 100th birthday as he passed away at the age of 90. Growing up, my grandfather was a very big part of our lives. We were very close. I had the opportunity to live in the same city as him and really build a close relationship with my grandparents. I didn't really realize who my grandfather was until sometime in elementary school when I started to see the way that other kids and parents reacted to my grandfather when he would come visit my school or visit for events or school functions and sports functions. And I really saw how people gravitated towards him. And that really let me know who he was and what kind of a big deal he was. My sister and I were very close growing up with my grandparents as they lived in central Hamilton, and we grew up in Stony Creek. So I had the opportunity to really spend time with my grandfather when he was at home. And that was a very special thing for him as he was very much a family man. He loved spending time with his wife, Yvonne, and his son, Keith, and myself and my sister and my mother, who was also very close with him. And growing up, my relationship with him as an adult also transformed, and he really became one of my best friends. And that's something that I've cherished throughout my life, and he was a great inspiration to me. Lincoln at home was very much a homebody. He was very humble. He liked the simple things in life, like gardening and watching movies and just spending time with family. And he didn't always get to do that as he was away in Ottawa and Toronto and working a lot and traveling the country and actually traveling the world. So we really appreciated the time that he did spend with us. I would say that some of my grandfather's greatest accomplishments, or maybe more so profound moments for him in his life growing up, were when he moved to Harlem as a teenager. My grandfather was moved there after his parents divorced, and his mother decided to take him to Harlem where she would get work. And what really transformed my grandfather moving to Harlem was that he was then surrounded by an incredible Black community, which he didn't really get to experience growing up in Toronto. So that was something that really changed his outlook on life and what he could accomplish. And something else that really resonated for him was when he traveled Africa with my grandmother, Yvonne, and they traveled Africa for 3 months with a medical group. And he really felt his purpose and presence be exemplified there. And he saw himself in the people that he met there, and it made him very proud to be a Black man in his position. Some of my grandfather's greatest inspirations in life, of course, was his mother, who inspired the title of his memoir, Go to School, You're a Little Black Boy. And he always, this really resonated with him, and that kind of became his legacy as someone who promoted the wealth of education and how important education is, and not only traditional education, but just learning in general, and the importance of evolving oneself in one purpose. His inspiration was also his purpose. And as Donna Young said, my grandfather fought for justice. He truly believed in that, and he believed in equality and equity. And I think that is what kind of sets him apart from many politicians in our society today, is that he was very much there, not for himself, but for how he could help other people. And lastly, my grandfather's truest inspiration was my grandmother, Yvonne. And he always said that he really wanted to give her a great life. He wanted to make her proud. He wanted to be able to give her the opportunity to walk into a room as a Black woman and have people stop for her. And he did accomplish that. And my grandmother was very proud of him. My grandfather inspires me in a way that sometimes is unexplainable. It's just something that I feel. He's always been a best friend to me, and always someone who supported me in whatever avenue in life I wanted to do. And he really was proud of my sister and I for what we've done so far in life. And unfortunately, he passed away in 2012. But since that time, I've been on the road to remember him and help others remember him and represent for our family. So I'm really appreciative that I get to continue to do that today. I would say that my fondest memory of my grandfather is just spending time with him throughout my life and really being able to see what a humble and humorous and fun person he was. He was always telling jokes, and he really loved people. He loved to be very social. He loved to talk to people. He loved when people would come up and talk to him and you know, show them who they were. And he really liked that personal connection with folks, I guess you could say. So I just want to really thank you all for being here today. Really appreciative to be able to share my grandfather's story and take part in this awesome event. And I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erika, for your insights and perspectives on the Honorable Lincoln Alexander. Earlier in the program, we heard from Quisha Wint as she sang the anthems for us. And I am excited that she's going to bring us another amazing song. So let me tell you a little bit about Quisha. Quisha Wint is the co-founder and president of QW Productions, whose mission is to provide outstanding and professional entertainment in a classy and nostalgic atmosphere, while providing a platform for artists and musicians to showcase their awesome gift in music. She aims to educate both the public and upcoming artists on the importance of keeping the music from the past alive, music that touches our hearts. Quisha has sung in many parts of Asia, Europe, North America, and the Caribbean. Currently living in the GTA, Quisha is well established in the tight-knit music industry. Not only is she an entrepreneur, producer, director, songwriter, arranger, worship director, and a mother, Quisha just began her journey into speaking at corporate events to empower and enrich corporation employees. Quisha released her first EP entitled My Life in 2021 to rave reviews. Her first single, Black Shoes, off her grassroots project, recently hit #1 on the indie music artist charts. What a resume. Now join me in welcoming Quisha Wint.
Thank you, ACCA, for having me here at this wonderful event to remember the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the Honorable Lincoln M. Alexander. It's an honor for me to be here. I have 2 personal stories to share with you. The first one is when I was in grade 4, Lieutenant Governor Lincoln Alexander came to our school. It was such a huge event that we had no class all day, and we were able to go to this assembly and hear from our Lieutenant Governor. It was amazing to see this tall Black man in such a prestigious role that I believe the entire school was just inspired by him. After the assembly, they had a photo op, and in that photo op, one of my sisters got to stand right beside him. And to this day, my family still has that newspaper clipping of that photo of them all together. Fast forward many years later, I became one of the anthem singers at the Raptors games. And because I was singing at the Raptors games, I got to sit right beside Lincoln Alexander's designated seats. So we got to talking and laughing because he was full of jokes, always joking around, but he was such an avid Raptors fan. So we heard everything from him, and he would always, share his popcorn if he wanted to, or ask if we wanted something to drink. He was a wonderful man. So those are my 2 personal stories. So I am honored to be here to be singing at this wonderful event. In a moment, you're going to hear a song called We Gotta Love. We Gotta Love was written out of a grassroots moment where my band and myself, due to the pandemic, we just got together and started writing music. And because of what was going on in the world, and we were having marches and George Floyd's death and Breonna Taylor, so many things were happening. And one of the things that I wanted to say from my heart was, you know what, we've got to love each other more instead of hating. And if we loved each other, then we would be in a better place in this world. And so this song is about us coming together as a community. In the video, you're going to see the entire band and myself wearing a shirt from a Canadian company called whahappenstar.com. That's whappenstar.com. And it has photo of the African continent with all the countries named within it. And we wanted to show that, yes, as a people, we need to come together and we need to be more loving with each other, because we will get further together that way than being apart. I hope you enjoy this song.
Awesome. If you are anything like me, you were just jamming in your seat to that tune. So thank you so much, Quisha. You definitely know how to move the crowd with your music. And as we said before, Quisha's EP, My Life, is out. Definitely, we want to support our local artists. So wherever you look for music, go look for Quisha Wint, My Life, and support her as much as possible. Thank you all so much. And thank you, Quisha, for being a part of today's event. As we approach the close of our event, I'm going to turn things over to President of ACA, Evelyn Myrie, to once again share some words with everyone.
Well, thank you so much for being a part of this phenomenal event. Thanks for being here and for engaging with us and talking about what things we can do for creating a better world, better Hamilton, better Canada, better global village. Thank you to the guest speaker, Donna Young. Thank you to Dwayne Morgan. Thank you to the performer. And thanks to everyone for being a part of today. I would just like to reiterate this little quote here that I had written earlier. As we move forward, we are faced with the pandemic, and we're faced with so many uncertainties around us. But I'd like us to really think about how we can stand in solidarity with those who have been traditionally marginalized, with Indigenous people, people of all colors, cultures, nationalities, people of all sexual orientations and genders, identities, people living with physical and mental disabilities, people struggling with poverty, and women fighting against societal and institutional sexism. I want to end with this quote from Martin Luther King that says, "Hate is just as injurious as the hater as it is to the hated. Like an unchecked cancer, hate corrodes the personality and eats away at its vital unity. Many of our inner conflicts are rooted in hate. This is why psychiatry says, love or perish. Hate is too great a burden to bear." Ashe. Thank you and have a wonderful evening. And thanks to everyone for being a part of the change that we are aspiring to do. And do go in your own ways to make a difference. I'd like to end with a comment by Jean Augustine earlier when she spoke in our breakout room and spoke about the importance of collaboration and partnership. And most importantly, though, is in these times and beyond, caring for each other. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Lincoln M. Alexander were about equality, justice, and we're looking for change. This song, Black Shoes, is a song that I wrote with my band that is metaphorically written to bring focus to the issues that people of color have faced since slavery to present. We hope that you listen to this song closely, as it's about eradicating systemic racism, which can only start from the people who make the laws. And so with that being said, we hope that this song would start a conversation and help us to understand what it is that we need to do to make these changes so that we are all equal and have justice.
Black shoes, you keep coming round my way. You're looking so fine, you even carry a shine, but you're really not our kind. Black shoes, I see you coming, different styles and even different shades. Seeing you in the light, I could tell by my sight you never were about the fight. What you gonna do when the road is rough? What you gonna do when you stand in mud? What you gonna do when the ride gets tough? What you gonna do? Over 400 years of oppression, I think you've left an impression. Why converse when you're so quick to hurt? Trusting you is not an option. Oh, black shoes, Can't you see that you're worn out? I think you've been used and abused. You don't even know who you are anymore. What you gonna do when the road is rough? What you gonna do when you're standing mud? What you gonna do when the ride gets tough? What you gonna do? As you sit